My name is Vera, and I am by most standards an unremarkable Kalahari female of 32 standard cycles. I have 4 eyes, 2 of which are used for standard visible light, and 2 which detect heat signatures. I have pale silver skin that shifts toward blue when I am cold, or embarrassed, or frightened. I have 3 fingers on each hand, a tail that I have mostly learned to keep from knocking things over in human-built spaces, and a reputation among my colleagues as someone who asks too many questions. That last part, I will admit, has gotten me into trouble more than once. But none of that is why I am telling you this story. I am telling you this story because of a human named Rook. Sergeant First Class Edison Rook Callaway, retired, 61 years old. Gray hair cut so short it looked like frost on stone. A jaw like the front bumper of an armored transport. Eyes the color of old copper. Quiet and steady in a way that made you feel both safe and deeply, profoundly watched. He walked with a slight drag in his left leg. A limp so practiced and so old that it had become part of his rhythm, like a drum beat with one soft note. He wore a faded green jacket most days, the kind that had seen actual weather, actual mud, actual things I will not name just yet. He ran the canteen, not a military base canteen, not some grand establishment. The Callaway Canteen, on the corner of Dreshport Station's lower ring, level 4, a small place, 11 tables, a counter with 6 stools, walls decorated with what I would later learn were called patches from various human military units, and photographs, some in color, some in black and white, all showing groups of humans in various states of grinning, squinting against sun, or staring at the camera with the flat, serious look that humans wore when they wanted to look brave. The food was extraordinary. I do not say this lightly. I had eaten at 43 different establishments across 6 species majority districts on Dreshport Station before I walked into the Callaway Canteen. The Yelhari noodle stand on level 7 made a broth that my home colony grandmother would have recognized. The Piranox bakery near the transit hub produced something they called a layered burn cake that honestly made my secondary eyes water with joy. I was not a food critic. I was a xenosociologist working a research position at the station's Cultural Exchange Bureau. But I had opinions, and the Callaway Canteen, from the very first bite of what Rook called a breakfast scramble, made every other opinion I had ever held about food feel slightly embarrassing. I became a regular. This is not unusual. Many beings became regulars. Rook was the kind of person who remembered your name after the 2nd visit and your order after the 3rd. He called me Doc, because I had a doctorate, and because he found the actual pronunciation of my full title fancier than a warhorse in a tuxedo, which I still do not entirely understand, but which he said with such warmth that I never bothered to question it. He also on occasion gave extra portions without being asked. This, I would later understand, was significant, but I am getting ahead of myself, because the story does not begin with me. It begins with a small Uelani girl named Pippy, who was 7 years old and who had been coming to the Callaway Canteen every single day for 6 weeks with an empty lunchbox. I did not notice at first. Why would I? I was usually at my table near the window, working through field notes on my datapad while eating. I noticed Rook because he was impossible not to notice. I noticed the other regulars gradually, the way you notice furniture that has always been in a room. There was Bram, a broad-shouldered Tulvari dock worker who ate 4 meals a day and told the same 3 jokes in rotation. There was Kelly, a human teenager who came in after school and ordered the same sweet drink every time and did her homework with the focused intensity of someone defusing an explosive device. There was old Mevin, whose species I genuinely could not identify, who sat in the corner, ate soup and said absolutely nothing to anyone ever, and whom Rook treated with the same easy respect he gave everyone. And there was Pippy. She was Uelani, which meant she was small even by her own species standards. Uelani children look to a non-Uelani eye, like someone took a perfectly ordinary mammalian child and made her out of spun glass and moonlight. Large luminous eyes, almost entirely iris, in a color that shifts between gold and green depending on mood. Skin with a faint iridescence, not bright, just the ghost of color, like oil on a still puddle. Pippy had a gap between her 2 front teeth, a small nervous habit of tugging at the bottom of her shirt when she was unsure of something, and hair that she wore in 2 mismatched braids, one tighter than the other, with ties that never matched. Small evidence of a child who dressed herself. She came in every day at the same time, 1300 station hours, right when the lunch crowd was thinning. She always sat at the same small table by the far wall, the one just below the framed photograph of a group of humans standing in front of something called an M1 Abrams, all of them squinting against a desert sun. She always put her lunchbox on the table. She always opened it, and it was always empty. The first time I noticed, I assumed I had simply missed the part where she ate. Children eat quickly. I was probably distracted. The second time, I paid more attention. She opened the box. She looked at the inside of it, she closed it again. Then she sat quietly with her hands folded on the table and waited. I thought, perhaps, someone was bringing her food separately. A parent, a guardian, a delivery. I went back to my notes. The third time I noticed, I watched longer. She opened the box, looked inside, closed it, folded her hands. Then very slowly, very deliberately, she took out a small drawing from inside the lunchbox. It was on a torn piece of pale material, not paper. Will Ani use a biodegradable sheet fiber instead? The drawing was of a table with food on it. Lots of food. Colorful, exaggerated, childlike food. The kind that only looks like food if you tilt your head and use imagination as a decoder. She put the drawing on the table in front of her. She looked at it, and then she folded it back up, placed it in the lunchbox, and closed the lid. I felt something in my chest that I did not have a precise word for. Then Rook came out from behind the counter. He walked over to Pippy's table the way he walked everywhere. Steady, unhurried, with that soft drumbeat limp. He was carrying a plate. "Hey, Sprout," he said. Pippy looked up. Her eyes were gold that day, happy adjacent. "Hi, Mr. Rook. You eat yet?" She hesitated. The shirt-tugging started. "I have my lunch," she said, and she placed one small hand on top of the lunchbox. Rook looked at the lunchbox. Then he looked at her. His copper eyes were very quiet and very steady. "That's so," he said, not as a question. "Yes," she said. "Funny thing," Rook said, setting the plate down on the table in front of her. "I made too much of this today. Cook's habit. You leave too much food out and it goes to waste. And my drill sergeant used to say that wasted food is an insult to the person who grew it." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down with the careful, measured movement of a man whose left knee had opinions about chairs. "Would you do me a favor and help me not waste this?" Pippy looked at the plate. It was a full meal. A proper, generous, carefully assembled meal. Warm bread, the kind with a soft inside and a slight crust. A small bowl of what looked like a golden stew with things that smelled of herbs and warmth. A section of fresh-cut fruit, arranged not carelessly but in the way that suggested someone had thought about how it would look to a small person sitting down and seeing it for the first time. "You made too much?" Pippy said. "Every single day," Rook said, with an expression so straight that I, watching from across the room, had to physically stop myself from laughing. She looked at him for a long moment. The gold in her eyes went a little greener. "You don't have to," she said quietly. "I know," Rook said. "That's what makes it a favor." She ate. She ate the way children eat when they are very hungry and trying not to show it. In the beginning controlled and polite, and then by the third bite completely absorbed. Fork working steadily, bread being torn with purpose, the stew disappearing at a rate that spoke of something more urgent than appetite. Rook sat across from her the whole time. He did not read anything. He did not check a screen. He just sat there, elbows on the table, cup of something hot in both hands, watching her with the particular expression that I would come to learn was his default setting when he thought he was responsible for something small and important. He was not making conversation. He was not performing kindness. He was just present. I finished my own meal. I paid. I gathered my data pad. As I passed the counter, I stopped. "Rook," I said. "Doc." He had come back around the counter by then. He was wiping down the surface with the slow, rhythmic motion of a man who had done this 10,000 times. "That girl," I said. "Pippy," he said. "Is she?" I searched for the right framing. "Is her situation known?" Rook looked at me over the counter. The copper in his eyes was doing something complicated. "It is now," he said. I did not know what to do with that. I nodded, said good afternoon, and left. But I came back the next day, and the day after that, and what I started to see piece by piece, day by day, was a portrait being assembled in the quiet space of 11 tables and 6 counter stools, the portrait of a man who ran a canteen the way some people run a lifeline, and a small girl who came every day with an empty lunchbox like a question waiting to be answered. I asked Bram, the dock worker, on the 4th day. "Pippy?" he said, in that deep rolling Tulvari voice that always sounded like distant thunder moving away rather than toward. "The little Uelani kid. She's here every day, I know. Do you know her situation?" Bram shrugged a shoulder the size of a cargo door. "Rook feeds her. Has been for weeks. Kid's guardian is some kind of," he trailed off, made a gesture that in Tulvari body language means complicated and unpleasant, transit worker. Different shifts all the time. Sometimes she's left on her own. At 7 years old. "Station life," Bram said. which was not an answer but was also somehow a complete one. I thought about the empty lunchbox. I thought about the drawing of food. I thought about a child who understood, at 7 years old, that she should pretend to have a lunch so that adults would not worry, but who also quietly somewhere drew pictures of the food she wished she had. I went home that night and sat in my research apartment on level 9 and looked at my notes on human social behaviors which I had been compiling for 3 years, and I thought about what I had learned versus what I was now seeing. I had notes on human altruism. I had notes on human community-building behaviors. I had extensive documentation on human military culture and the particular social frameworks it produced, the hierarchies, the loyalty structures, the concept of unit that extended, in veterans, far beyond the original military application. I had a whole section on what humans called taking care of your own. But the thing I had not fully understood, not from reading, was that for humans like Rook, your own was not a fixed category. It was not defined by blood or contract or species or pre-existing relationship. It was defined by proximity and need. He had seen a child with an empty lunchbox. That was sufficient. She was his now, in the way that mattered, in the way that meant he would make too much food every single day for as long as necessary, and sit across from her while she ate, and never once make her feel like she was receiving charity, because he understood, with the particular intelligence of someone who had spent decades in hard places watching people break and hold and break again, that dignity mattered more than nutrition, that how you fed someone was as important as whether you fed them. I stayed up until 0200 working on a new section of notes. I titled it, The Veteran and the Lunchbox. I thought it was a professional observation. I was wrong. It was the beginning of something much larger, because 3 days later, I arrived at the Callaway Canteen at my usual time and found the door open and Rook standing on the step with his arms crossed and an expression on his face that I had not seen before. It was the face of a man who had just learned something. "Doc," he said, when he saw me. "Rook," I said. "What happened?" He was quiet for a moment. The drag in his left leg shifted. He looked at something in his hand, and when I stepped closer I saw that it was the lunchbox. Pippy's lunchbox. Small and blue-gray, with a little clip on the front. It was open, and inside, folded carefully, was not one drawing. There were dozens of them. Every single day she had come in with that empty lunchbox, she had put a new drawing inside, and she had not thrown them away. She had kept them all folded small, layered on top of each other, a quiet archive of hope illustrated by a 7-year-old's hand. Rook had found them because Pippy that morning had left the lunchbox behind. He had opened it to put her name on the inside so he could return it. And he had found 6 weeks of drawings, tables full of food, people sitting around tables. A figure that was unmistakably Rook himself, large and square-shaped with what appeared to be a very enthusiastic interpretation of his green jacket. The same table from the canteen, the same far wall, the same photograph on the wall above, drawn by a child who had memorized the shape of the room she felt safe in. Rook was not crying, but the set of his jaw was doing something that in a human face means that crying has been considered and is being very firmly declined. "She's been drawing these every day," he said. "Yes," I said. "She drew me," he said. "Yes," I said again. He closed the lunchbox. He held it for a moment with both hands, the way you hold something small and fragile when you have only just understood what it weighs. "I've got to make a call," he said. "To whom?" He looked at me. The copper in his eyes was very steady. "I know some people," he said, "who know some people. Pippy's guardian needs a shift restructure. That's fixable. The food situation is fixable. The being alone situation is fixable." He paused. "I spent 22 years in the service fixing unfixable situations with insufficient resources and bad weather." Another pause. "This is not that." He went back inside. I stood on the step for a moment, holding my data pad, watching through the window as he walked to the counter, set the lunchbox down carefully, and picked up his communicator. I had come to the Callaway Canteen for the food. I had stayed for something I still did not have a precise word for, but I was beginning to understand the shape of it. I want to be clear about something because I think it matters for everything that comes after. I am a xenosociologist. I study cultures the way a cartographer studies land, from a careful distance, with precise instruments, always mindful that the map is not the territory and the observer is never truly outside the thing being observed. I have spent 11 years documenting the behaviors of 12 different species across 4 station systems. I have published 37 papers. I have sat in more conference rooms than I care to count and explained to colleagues in polished, measured language why a particular behavior means what it means and how it fits into a broader framework. I say all of this so that you understand exactly how thoroughly I was failing at my own profession in that moment. Because standing outside the Callaway Canteen watching a 61-year-old retired human soldier hold a child's lunchbox like it was something sacred, I was not thinking about frameworks or documentation or the broader implications for xenocultural understanding. I was thinking, I really hope this works. That is not a professional thought. That is a hoping thought, a caring thought. The kind of thought that means you have crossed some invisible line from observer to participant without noticing the exact moment it happened. Rook made his call. I know this because I went inside, sat at my usual table, ordered my usual breakfast scramble, and watched him through the window into the small back office where he kept the station maintenance logs and the spare aprons, and apparently, a communicator with a contact list that would have impressed a diplomat. He was on the call for 40 minutes. He did not pace. He stood still, one hand on the desk, speaking in a voice too low for me to hear, and he had the focused economic stillness of someone who has learned that unnecessary movement costs energy, and energy is not always renewable. He was not angry. He was not loud. He was the kind of calm that is not the absence of feeling but the absolute mastery of its direction. Bram came in at his usual time, ordered his usual 4-plate arrangement, sat down, looked at me, looked at the back office and said, "What's Rook doing?" "Fixing something," I said. Bram nodded as if this was a complete and satisfying explanation, which, to his credit, it was. Pippy arrived at 1300, as always. She came through the door with her usual slightly cautious entrance, that pause on the threshold that children do when they have learned that spaces do not always welcome them. She looked at her usual table, then she looked at the counter, then her luminous eyes found the lunchbox sitting there, and she went very still. Rook came out of the back office at almost the exact same moment. The timing was either coincidence or the kind of instinct that comes from years of knowing when things are about to happen. "Hey, Sprout," he said. "Mr. Rook," she said, her voice smaller than usual, her eyes fixed on the lunchbox. "I know," he said. He picked up the lunchbox and walked it over to her. He set it on her table, then pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, same as always. Same elbows on the table, same cup of something hot, same steady copper eyes. Pippy sat down slowly. She put her hands on the lunchbox but did not open it. There was a silence that had a particular texture to it. The kind of silence where both people in a conversation know that something has shifted but neither one has decided yet how to speak about it. Rook spoke first. "I opened it," he said, "to write your name inside so I could return it. I want you to know that." Pippy was very still. "I found your drawings," he said. The gold in her eyes flickered. Her hand went to the hem of her shirt. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, the words coming out fast and automatic, the reflex of a child who has learned to apologize before she has even assessed the situation, which is its own kind of information about what her life had looked like. "Don't be," Rook said, and there was something in his voice that was absolutely firm about it, not unkind, but firm, the way a load-bearing wall is firm. The kind of thing that does not move regardless of what pushes against it. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Not a single thing." Pippy looked at him. The green was rising in her eyes now, which in Yuelani emotional coloring means something between confusion and cautious hope. A complicated color. "You drew me," Rook said. "You're big," she said very quietly. "You're easy to draw." There was a pause, and then Rook laughed. It was not a polite laugh, or a performed laugh. It came up from somewhere genuine, and it was big, proportional to him, a short, warm, real sound, and it changed the texture of the air in the room the way a window opening changes a closed space. Pippy blinked, and then cautiously, like someone testing ice before committing weight to it, she smiled. "You drew the canteen," Rook said when the laugh settled. "It's my favorite place," she said, and then immediately looked like she had said too much. That familiar child instinct of having revealed something and now waiting to see whether it would be used against her. Rook did not react with anything that could be used against her. "Good," he said simply. "It should be somebody's favorite place." He unfolded his hands around his cup. "I made calls this morning." Pippy's expression shifted. "Uncertain. About me," she said. "About your guardian schedule," he said. "Dalvi works the freight transit rotation, right?" Pippy nodded slowly. "I know the shift coordinator for that rotation," Rook said. "Fought alongside his older brother about 30 years ago on a dust ball of a moon that I am not going to describe to you because you are 7 and it would give you nightmares. And also because it gave me nightmares, and I am significantly larger than you." He paused. "Point is, we have an understanding. The kind that means when I ask for a schedule restructure for family accommodation reasons, It gets looked at by someone who is going to say yes. Pippy was staring at him. Dalvey is going to have more consistent hours, Rook said. Daytime rotation. Stable. It will not happen overnight. There is paperwork and there is always paperwork, but it will happen. You did that, Pippy said. Not a question. More like a thing she was saying out loud to make it real. I made some calls, Rook said again. He was determinedly modest about it in the way that people are modest about things when they are not looking for credit, when the action was not performed for the reaction but simply because it needed to be done. Pippy looked down at the lunchbox. Why? She said. Rook tilted his head slightly. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, which is to say he did not immediately answer it. He let it sit for a moment, which is what you do with real questions. When I was in the service, he said, there was a saying. It wasn't in any official handbook. It was just something that got passed down unit to unit, year to year. It went like this. You take care of the person next to you. That's the job. Everything else is just details. Pippy listened. I've been out of the service for 9 years, Rook said. But the job doesn't really change. The uniform does, the location does, the people change. He looked at her steadily. But the job is the same. I'm not in your unit, Pippy said. You come into my canteen every day, Rook said. That's unit enough. The green in Pippy's eyes went very bright. She did not say anything. But she opened the lunchbox, and she took out all the folded drawings and she laid them on the table between them, unfolding each one carefully, the full archive of 6 weeks, tables and food and a large square figure in a green jacket, the room she had memorized, the place she had felt safe, all of it spread out in the quiet of the afternoon while the canteen held its breath around them. Rook looked at each one. He did not rush it. He looked at each drawing with the same attention, each small piece of paper getting its full moment, and I watched his face from across the room and I watched something move through it, something that was not sadness exactly but was in the same territory as sadness, the territory of things that matter, and are heavy, precisely because they matter. He got to the last drawing. It was different from the others. The others had been of food, mostly, of the table, of the room, of him. This one was of 2 figures sitting across from each other at a table. One figure was small. One was large, square-shouldered, with an unmistakable green jacket rendered in the enthusiastic and technically questionable style of a 7-year-old with strong opinions about shape. Between them on the table was a plate, and above the plate, in careful letters that were just slightly uneven, the way letters are when a child has worked very hard on them, were the words, "Thank you." Rook looked at that drawing for a long time. The copper in his eyes was doing something that his jaw was working very hard to keep contained. He did not cry, but it was, I can tell you from my position across the room with 4 eyes and 11 years of studying the physical expressions of 9 species, it was genuinely close. He folded the drawing back up carefully. He put it in his jacket pocket. Not the pile, not the counter. His pocket, which is where humans put things they intend to keep. You want some lunch? He said. You made too much again, Pippy said. Every single day, Rook said, in exactly the same tone as before. She smiled. It was different from her earlier smiles, less cautious, less testing. A full smile, gap-toothed and brilliant, the smile of a child who has decided that the ice holds and it is safe to stand on it. Rook got up and went to the kitchen. I sat at my table and did not pretend to be working on my data pad, because there are moments when pretending to work is an insult to what you are actually witnessing. What I was actually witnessing was the particular and unremarkable and entirely extraordinary sight of a man who had spent 22 years in the business of large, violent, world-altering events, applying exactly the same skills to the smallest possible scale. 1 child, 1 table, 1 plate of food, 1 pocket where a drawing now lived. Bram leaned over from the neighboring table. She's smiling, he murmured. Yes, I said. He made a satisfied sound and went back to his 4th plate. Rook came back with lunch. But here is the part that I have not told you yet, the part that I was only beginning to understand that afternoon, watching Pippy eat and Rook sit across from her with his cup and his quiet attention, the part that would take me weeks more to fully process. It was not just Pippy. Over the following days I started to pay attention in a different way, not the professional attention I had been deploying, organized and categorized and filed under the appropriate research headings, a different kind, the kind where you stop looking for patterns and start looking at people. And what I saw was this. Bram, the dock worker. He came in 4 times a day and ate enormous quantities of food and told the same 3 jokes in rotation. He had been doing this for 2 years. Rook knew every version of those 3 jokes and laughed at them every time with exactly enough genuine amusement to make Bram feel that they were still funny. which they were not, but which was not the point. The point was that Bram worked 14-hour shifts in the freight docks and had no family on the station, and those 3 jokes were the closest thing he had to conversation that felt like home. Rook knew this. Selly, the teenager with her homework and her sweet drink. I looked closer and saw that she came in specifically during the hours when the canteen was busiest, not when she could have more space and quiet to work. She came when it was loud and full and warm because she was doing her homework in a place that felt like people existed, which told you something about where she was going home to. Rook always made sure her glass was full without being asked, and sometimes stopped by her table and asked a question about her work, never in a way that was intrusive, always in a way that was like a hand briefly on a shoulder, just checking, just present. And old Mevin in the corner with the soup. I finally asked Rook about old Mevin, 3 weeks after the day with the drawings. He was quiet for a moment, wiping the counter. Slow, rhythmic motion. Mevin lost his partner about a year ago, Rook said. 50 years together. They used to come in here every day, both of them. Always ordered the same thing. Always sat in that corner. He looked toward the corner table. After his partner passed, he kept coming. Same table, same order. He put down the cloth. He doesn't talk because he doesn't need to. He just needs to come somewhere that remembers. I looked at old Mevin in his corner with his soup. And you remember? I said. I remember both of them. Rook said. That's the point. I went home that night and I did not open my research notes. I sat in my apartment on level 9 and I thought about 22 years of military service and what it does and does not do to a person. I thought about how some people come out of hard years harder, walls thicker, circle smaller, care rationed more carefully because it has been proven to be expensive. And I thought about how some people come out with the opposite result, the walls removed, the circle expanded until it has no real boundary, the care not rationed but deployed, which is a military word but also the right word, deployed like a resource that is available and should be used where it is needed. Rook had come out the second way. I am not saying it was simple. I am not saying there were no walls and no costs. I am not saying the limp in his left leg was just a physical thing. I had been watching him long enough to know that some mornings were slower than others, that some days the copper in his eyes was quieter in a way that was different from calm, that sometimes he sat in the back office for 10 minutes between the breakfast rush and the lunch prep, and came out with the careful assembled expression of a man who had recently spoken to something difficult and won. But the canteen was his chosen terrain, and on his chosen terrain he was exactly the kind of soldier that the word soldier was invented to describe. Not in the shooting sense, in the older, deeper sense, the one that means, I am here, I will hold this position, and the people in my vicinity will be accounted for. A month after the day with the drawings, something happened. Dalvey, Pippy's guardian, came into the canteen for the first time. I know it was the first time because Rook's face did a thing when the door opened that I had never seen his face do before. A micro-expression, very quick, a calibration, like a person who has been thinking about a situation in the abstract and has just been informed it is now concrete. Dalvey was a Yuilani adult, which meant she was small and luminous-eyed like Pippy, but with the particular careful economy of movement that comes from years of physical work. She was maybe 35, maybe 40, it was hard to tell. She had her hair back, and she wore the faded jacket of the freight transit crew, and she stood just inside the door looking at the canteen with an expression that was, unmistakably, the expression of someone bracing for a difficult conversation. She had come to have a difficult conversation. Pippy was not with her. Rook came out from behind the counter and walked to meet her. Not fast, not slow, the steady drumbeat pace. Dalvey, he said. You're Callaway, she said. Her voice was slightly rough, the voice of someone who spent a lot of time talking over machinery noise. Rook, he said. You want to sit down? She looked at the tables. She looked at him. She sat down. I will tell you clearly that I should have given them privacy. I should have moved to a different table or stepped outside or found some professional reason to be elsewhere. I did not. I sat at my table, and I watched. And I am not entirely proud of this, but I am not going to lie to you about it either. Rook brought her coffee without asking. She wrapped her hands around it the same way he always wrapped his hands around his cup, which I suspected was not a coincidence so much as a shared grammar of people who needed their hands occupied when they were about to say hard things. She talks about this place, Dalvey said. She's good company, Rook said. I didn't know, Dalvey said. About the lunches, about the... She stopped. Her jaw was doing the same thing his had done, the thing that means crying has been considered and is being declined. She was packing an empty box every day and I didn't know. She's 7, Rook said. She was trying to take care of you. Dalvey looked at him. She didn't want you to worry. he said. Kid that age, that's what they do when they care about the people around them. They carry things quiet so nobody else has to carry them. Dalvi put down the coffee. She pressed both hands flat on the table. I should have known, she said. Maybe, Rook said. But you were working, and you were doing the best you had with what you had, and that is not nothing. He paused. The schedule change goes through next rotation. You'll have day shift, consistent. She'll have you home. Dalvi looked at him for a long moment. Why did you do all this? She said. And there it was again. The same question Pippy had asked. The question that kept coming up as if people could not quite believe that the answer was as simple as it appeared to be. Rook was quiet for a moment. I had a unit once, he said. About 40 years ago. We were somewhere cold and very far from anywhere, and we were behind on supplies, and about a third of my people had not eaten a real meal in 4 days. He looked at the coffee. My sergeant at the time, man named Olga Tren, tough as old boot leather and twice as durable, she showed up with a cargo crate, and she cooked for every single one of us on a field stove in a blizzard. No reason to, no order to. She just did it because we needed it and she could. He looked up. I asked her the same question you're asking me, he said. She said, when you can do a thing that needs doing and you don't do it, you've made a choice. Make sure you're choosing right. The canteen was very quiet. That's it? Dalvi said. That's everything, Rook said. Dalvi was quiet for a long time. Then she picked up the coffee and finished it. She stood up. She looked around the canteen, the 11 tables, the photographs, the patches on the wall, the small table by the far wall where her daughter sat every day. Can I bring her in tomorrow? She said. I want to come with her. I want to sit with her at her table. You'll need to order something, Rook said. I don't run a charity, I run a canteen. The corner of Dalvi's mouth moved. What do you recommend? She said. Breakfast scramble, he said immediately. Best thing on the menu. She nodded. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and looked back. Thank you, Rook, she said. Tomorrow, he said. 1300. She left. I sat at my table for a long time after that. The afternoon light through the station viewport was doing something warm and amber across the 11 tables, and the canteen had the particular quality of silence that is not empty but full, the kind of silence that happens after something has been resolved. I opened my datapad. I looked at my notes on human social behavior, 37 papers worth of careful professional observation. I closed the datapad. I went to the counter. Rook, I said. Doc, he said. I have been coming here for 4 months, I said. I have been observing you for research purposes. He looked at me over the counter. Not surprised, not offended, just listening. I want to stop, I said. Stop coming in, he said. Stop observing, I said. I want to just come in, for the scramble, and the company. Rook looked at me for a moment. The copper in his eyes was warm. That'll cost you the same as always, he said. I know, I said, and you'll probably still end up taking notes anyway, he said. You've got that look. I cannot help it, I said. It is a professional hazard. Fair enough, he said. He turned back to the counter, then looked over his shoulder. Tomorrow Pippy and Dalvi are both coming in. 1300. If you happen to be here around that time, that would be fine. I usually arrive around 12:45, I said. Good habit, he said. I left the Callaway Canteen and walked back through the station to my apartment on level 9, and I sat down and I opened a brand new document, not a research file, not a paper, not an entry in a xenocultural database. I titled it, What I Have Learned, and the first line I wrote was this: there is a kind of person who, having been through the worst of things, decides that their primary function going forward is to make sure the people nearest to them do not experience that same worst. They do not announce this. They do not advertise it. They open a small canteen in the lower ring of a transit station, and they learn everyone's name, and they make too much food every single day, and they sit across from a 7-year-old with an empty lunchbox, and they do not make it a production. They simply make it a meal. I had 3 years of research on human altruism. None of it had told me this. The lunchbox did, and somewhere, in the pocket of a green jacket belonging to a retired sergeant named Edison Callaway, a small folded drawing of 2 people at a table was traveling through the station, going wherever he went, carried the way soldiers carry the things that remind them what the job is actually for, not the fighting, not the surviving, the table, the food, the person across from you. That is the job. That has always been the job.
What part of this story hit you the hardest? Drop it in the comments, like and subscribe If you want more stories like this, see you in the next one.